My name is Debbie Epstein Henry, and I'm the founder of DEH Consulting, Speaking, Writing, and also an executive consultant to Axiom. I am honored today to be interviewing my friend and colleague, Rena Hozore Reiss, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Marriott International. Welcome, Rena. How are you?
Thank you, Debbie. It's great to be here. I feel like we're pros at doing this together. I always enjoy your conversations because that's what they really are. So
Well,
very excited.
thank you so much for that. And I have to say, my only sadness is that we're not in the in-person venues where we normally are together. I guess most recently at the United Nations, which was super fun presenting with you there. And then I know the Peninsula Hotel in Chicago, and I remember really good potato chips at Lloyd's in Chicago. So this would all be much more fun.
I agree. Too many potato chips, but they were delicious.
That's right. That's right. But so we've got a lot to cover today. And what I want to do is encourage the audience to submit questions on YouTube Live, and I will try to intersperse those as readily as I can. And we're going to end promptly at 1:45 Eastern. But in the meantime, I'll start my questions and again, pepper in ones from the audience as best that I can. But I want to start with your background and just ask you, Rena, walk us a little bit through your background. And in doing so, share what you believe to be the single most important experience that you've had that has helped you navigate in these tumultuous times.
Great. Oh my goodness. The career path gets longer with every passing year because more time goes by. I have done sort of a mix of in-house and law firm business. And I started out of law school, like many of us, in what was then a mid-sized firm. It would now be considered a small firm in Miami. Did sort of, well, first I thought it would be a tax lawyer. That lasted about 6 weeks. And I realized that it just didn't speak to me. So I sort of moved into a general business and commercial practice and had the opportunity to go in-house at the Miami Herald Publishing Company, which was fascinating. And I worked mostly on the business side. My husband is a journalist, fair disclosure, and we all decided it would be better if I didn't spike his stories. That wasn't going to be good for the long run in our house. And we did everything. It was a combination of freelance photographer contracts, and if there was going to be a charity event, at the Miami Arena, we'd do that. And I loved it. And then we had the opportunity to move to Washington, which was closer to our families. We had both lived there before, and we took it. And after staying home, I had 2 tiny little kids at the time. I stayed at home for a little while, realized that really wasn't the right path for me, and was fortunate to find a home at a very small law firm here in Washington, and really sort of became a real estate lawyer. Worked with a colleague there who then went to Marriott and kept calling me up and saying, you should come, you would love this work. And I kept saying to him, it's not the right time. This suits me great. By the way, I had a wonderful, what we call lawyer part-time arrangement. And it was the right thing for me at the time. And I felt like I was personally and professionally fulfilled. And then as time went on, it became clear it was time for me to make a move. And went to talk to my friend who was then a lawyer at Marriott, and he was extremely generous, dropped off my resume with a variety of the practice leaders. 6 weeks later, I find myself talking to the general counsel and getting an offer and thinking, God, I wonder if I should talk to somebody else, before I just make this jump. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. Joined Marriott. I sort of loved the people I met. I loved the work, although I had no idea really what being a hotel lawyer was, and spent 10 years doing hotel development in the US. And about a year and a half, a little less after I got to Marriott, 9/11, we weathered the storm of 9/11, which was obviously a huge watershed in the country's life, in economic life, and in the hospitality industry, as basically travel stopped. But it resumed fairly shortly thereafter. And spent, as I say, 10 years at Marriott doing increasingly broad things, and then had the opportunity to move to Chicago to become the GC at Hyatt. And I had never really thought about a GC position, but this was a situation where the stars aligned. Sort of my personal life made it possible for me to make a move. What I was doing, I felt like I had done so much, but this was an opportunity in an industry I love that was hard to say no to. So I sort of moved to Chicago. I didn't know anybody in Chicago, and um, there were some former Marriott colleagues who had actually moved to Hyatt. They had gone public about nine months before I joined, and it was amazing. I felt like I had had a lens on the world like this, and all of a sudden it just opened. And people would come into my office and say, "What do you think we should do about this?" And I'm looking around thinking, "I have no idea. Why are you asking me?" But it was eye-opening. It was exciting. It was a little terrifying. Spent 7 years at Hyatt, which were terrific, and then got a call. Would you talk to us about coming back to Marriott? And I was floored because I wasn't sure that I would be welcomed back, and B, just sort of astonished that, wow, I mean, this was coming, as an opportunity to me. And it was very much, again, a confluence of things that brought me back. It was professionally, it seemed like an amazing opportunity. Personally, Washington had been our home for 20 years. We had a lot of family here, we had friends here, and it really was an opportunity to come home in many ways. So here I am, almost 3 years later, hard to believe. And again, we've weathered a lot of storms. And most recently, I think COVID is world changing for all of us.
It's interesting. Anytime I speak with a woman leader, I always find, there's a lot when they recount their background that is attributable to fortuity. And I know how exemplary you are and how remarkable your resume is. You're very understated, but you as you were counted as sort of being tapped on the shoulder, sort of surprise, or that kind of thing. But there's so much contribution and enormous wealth of information that you bring to every one of those roles, which is why you weren't just miraculously tapped on the shoulder, but in fact, they were clamoring down the door for you. But I want to come back to the question really at hand, because you referenced 9/11, and of course we're in COVID still now. Is what single experience has really been instrumental for you in enabling you to navigate the prior crisis as well as this one?
So it's funny, I'm not sure there's any one single thing, but a couple of things come to mind when I think about all this. One thing that has been remarkable to me over the past 6 months is I have an amazing team, and we have worked together so closely. We used to have pre-COVID, before times, as we're fond of calling it in my family. We would have a staff meeting every month. I would have one-on-ones with my folks, and it sort of bumped along. Well, all of a sudden, we were meeting as a team several times a week. Part of it was just making sure everybody was sort of emotionally okay. Part of it was, oh my God, what's on this ever-growing list of things that we need to deal with? And we've since kind of moderated that cadence, thank God, a little bit. But people who I really depend on, both for professional collaboration, as well as these are friends, and emotionally, I think we've supported each other. It's amazing, sort of life keeps going on outside of what we're dealing with at work. And it's just been, sometimes we'll just call each other up to sort of commiserate and say, oh my God, I can't take this anymore. And some of it has been some really hard choices that we've needed to make on the people front. I know we'll probably talk about that a little later. But having a team of people who are honest with you, supportive, there's no substitute for it. I'm fortunate to have it in my personal life as well, but it's really important to have it in your work life. I think the other thing is you really, through all points, and this goes for crisis and non-crisis situations, is what's your North Star? What are your priorities? How to keep all that stuff straight. And I think for many of us, that's obviously been family, it's been health, it's been general well being, it's having a sense of groundedness. I think one of the things this past 6 months has shown us is that you can work all the time if you want, but that's actually not a really good thing for you personally. It's probably not the best thing for you professionally either. But keeping people's priorities straight and then being able to say to your team, we're all going to keep priorities straight and we're going to need to make sure that we communicate that with our teams. And you have to keep your sense of humor because, God, this is hard work.
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, I think that emphasis that you have, Rena, about clarifying priorities, I think what's also important there is reevaluating that.
Mm,
We all have a different to-do list. And the people who I see lapsing, some of those people are ones who are sort of retreating back to the old habits. And it's really, this is a refresher. This is a whole game changer. And if we don't reevaluate and reassess those priorities, we're really going to be struggling. And I just wonder, this notion of really building a happy and productive virtual culture, are there any new strategies that you've been using that are different, that feel different, that are deliberate, or any experiments that you've tried that you think are particularly fruitful?
yeah, it's a great question. I think to some extent, because of the industry we were in such survival mode over the past 6 months that we're actually pivoting to exactly what you're talking about. Is like, what are the lessons learned that we can now bring forward? And I think that's a little bit of a work in progress for us. We were just trying to paddle furiously to keep our heads above water
Of
over the
course.
past 2 months. I will say having a sense of humor about all this is absolutely key. In other instances, too, we would often start meetings with what we would call a moment of levity. And it started a couple of years ago, and I can't even remember the headline from the New York Post, but it was screamingly funny. And it was the kind of thing where you just thought, okay, put aside everything you're dealing with and all the stress and the emotion and the hours worked and just, you know what? There's still funny things. It's one of the things I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but every once in a while when you see somebody just post something that is absolutely hilarious and it's life-saving. Um, I'm a big advocate of kindness. I have a big sign outside my office that says "Be kind." When I first got to the office and the CEO walked by, he's like, "This is the law department, right? What are you talking about?" But I think it's so important, and that's basically it means don't be a jerk. Doesn't mean be a pushover because we absolutely don't believe in that. But there are ways, and I think it's kindness to other people, but it's kindness to ourselves. Sort of, you know, we're not going to do things perfectly. Nobody ever does. Um, our families won't, our colleagues won't, people that we work with, but everything is a learning opportunity and it's an opportunity to show a little bit of human empathy. And I think that has become really important. A little bit, before times you'd go into a meeting, how are you? We're fine, blah, 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 blah. Now I think people really mean it. They get on a call and they're like, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your kids? Amazing how much we've learned about each other's personal circumstances. And people have all sorts of stuff they're dealing with. I have colleagues who are schooling 3 kids in their basement. And, how do you do your work at the same time? I have my own challenges with aging parents that we're trying to navigate through in these times. Um, you have We have other people who have had a variety of other challenges. One thing I want to talk about a little bit later is, for our Black colleagues, starting with the killing of George Floyd at the beginning of the summer, this has been an incredibly emotional and difficult summer. And as somebody said, and you're still expected to get on the next Zoom call and kind of make believe that nothing is going on in your life and in your emotions. And I think we've worked really hard to be honest with each other about that stuff. So if there is one thing, and I know we're doing this virtually, and it is not the same as being in person. Um, But I think staying connected with each other is even more important now. We can't all retreat into a room in the basement and, just kind of tap on a computer all day.
There's so many threads in there, Rena, that are important. Just to pick up on the last point around Black Lives Matter, there was a powerful piece earlier this year over the summer in the Wall Street Journal about a lot of Black executives bringing their and telling their stories for the first time. And it's interesting how you juxtapose that point around also that you're learning more and more about your colleagues. Is when we think about the upside of remote work, perhaps one of the positives is we have more entree into each other's lives. We're sitting in each other's homes right now. And can we use that as an opportunity, for example, with Black Lives Matter, that movement, to be able to say, yes, we no longer want or expect that you are keeping your lives a secret and the struggles that you're facing. And that is an opportunity. Can we regain or develop more trust by having the intimacy of being in each other's homes? The other thing I just want to pick up on is this issue of humor. I just think it's so helpful in these times, and I love the fact that you're using that with your team. I love the moment of levity. I know early on there was some reference to I think Tito's, and that in fact that Tito's alcohol vodka can't be used as a for hand sanitizing. And by the way, you're going to need it when you go into quarantine. That like you don't want to use it on hand sanitizer.
Right, don't use it up.
Yeah. I also, another favorite, I recently was listening to a podcast, and this guy was saying how, how we're talking about Blur's Day, every day is the same. And he was saying like, he and his girlfriend, they actually only will watch certain Netflix shows on the weekend versus the weekday, because they're like, we don't want to confuse like, oh no, Homeland's weekend.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. We have some outside questions and I want to grab some. What about people who do not have the ideal setup at home and whose homes would not necessarily be ones where they would show the world? This is true for many workers, and let's talk about that. And actually, let's talk about some of the innovation you're doing with the use of Marriott spaces now, and how you're rethinking about how your industry would be a resource for people.
So it's a great question. I'll give you an example very much from our world, which is our colleagues in Asia have very different home setups than those of us in the US. So homes in Asia tend to be much smaller. Big issue in Japan, actually kind of bad Wi-Fi in a lot of people's private homes, which is just crazy when you think about how we usually portray Japan. We all love our virtual backgrounds, I have to tell you, because then people can walk behind you and, you can sort of have what I call aspirational backgrounds behind you. But some of this is an acknowledgement that, many of us are quite privileged to live in homes where there's either enough space for people to spread out, and you have appropriate Wi-Fi. By the way, I think this is a huge issue for the school systems where the kids are being schooled at home. It's terrifying to think about disparities in our society that are just magnified by the current circumstances. I have colleagues, they have 3 kids and they have 3 iPads and it's fine. That is absolutely not the case in many of our more disadvantaged communities. So it's a bigger issue than just learning. We've tried to open our office, and although there are restrictions on how many people are in there, and health checks before you come in, and physical distancing measures once you're in the office, I think it's important that sometimes people need a break, and they're not seeing each other in the office actually, because we don't have conference rooms open or the like. But to give people the opportunity to get a break from their family, whom they love dearly and probably not meant to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with for months on end. We do have possibilities of people for whom it's appropriate that they can go and work in hotels, in hotel rooms. I guess it's a bit the WeWork model, although not exactly. That's always been a more communal model, and this would obviously be people coming in and having quiet space private space to work in. We were talking before, some hotels, if you're super fortunate to be able to do this and go to some of the resorts, they're actually providing school for the kids. It's over Zoom, but there are spaces for the kids to do Zoom. Parents are working during the day, and then you get together in the evenings for dinner. But I do think it is challenging, and certainly for people who cannot work from home. And of course, I'm not even talking about nurses, doctors, first responders and the like. Even grocery people, thank God, who are still working in our grocery stores. But we're looking at it even in terms of the work that our folks are doing on the legal team. Easier for an attorney to work at home, more difficult for an administrative assistant. What does that mean for that whole job going forward? So, sort of these things that become, okay, immediately we have to think about how does that person work from home to, wow, how do we think about our department going forward and what jobs look like in the coming years?
Yes, and I think this issue around access to space that is, usable for work is a huge issue of luxury, as is access to good technology. And I think when we're having these conversations, we can't diminish that. I want to ask you about some better outcomes for the business that perhaps you've been able to achieve since the pandemic. Could you talk about opportunities or ways that you've been able to achieve better outcomes by perhaps changing expectations or some other means?
Better outcomes. I mean, again, I hearken back to we were really just scrambling around for a few
Of
months as
course.
the world was falling apart. But I think one thing, we talked about this a little bit as well, Debbie, is that people would say, "Oh, the business has fallen off, so clearly you guys are, you're not as busy. There's not as much going on." To which we all guffawed in reaction because it was absolutely not the case. We had the added challenge of very early on, we put almost all of our teams on furlough or reduced work week. And I have to say, incredibly difficult. We had to do it very fast. So we were making judgments that we then had to sort of pivot because, work was there and we didn't have the right people to do it. Okay. Part of that is just learning. You make decisions and then you need to remake them as you learn new information. It actually became very challenging for the legal department because people on supposed reduced work weeks, it wasn't. You were just being paid less. And we found that work really accelerated in every single practice area. Our employment lawyers were dealing with things both at the properties, at our hotels, and also at our above property headquarters that had to do with things like furloughs, reduced work weeks, severance plans, and the like. And then, of course, all the challenges that come when you have unhappy people who challenge what the company is doing. Our litigation team, I would say more of it has been counseling at the moment than litigation. We'll get to litigation down the road, but at the beginning, it's really counseling the business. What else? Lodging operations for sure, asset management, as you have an increasing number of hotels that are in distress. I have to say, the US, and I'll just talk about the US for the moment, you have a patchwork of, there's no federal policy on anything. So you have a patchwork of state and local jurisdictions. The rules change daily. Is a hotel essential business? Can you open? Can you not open? What about your call center? What are the restrictions for people coming in to work? It was crazy working closely with our government affairs teams on matters like that. And I have to say, people have great relationships with the business, and those are absolutely imperative at a time like this because people trust each other. They're not doing end runs around the legal department. They're really using us as business partners. How do we navigate through this? You have paycheck protection. Nobody knows what it is, who's eligible, or some of the employee tax credits, the payroll stuff. So we're literally working with every single discipline in the company. We're doing bond financings. We have public filings to do. We're working on press releases with our communications team. In some ways, if you could get over the stress of it, it was a mind-blowing learning experience.
I'm actually breaking out in hives now and very affirmed that I stopped practicing law about 20 years ago because I definitely can handle this. I think the issue around obviously staffing and having to furlough people, I imagine the enormity of that stress, particularly because, like you said, it was on a heightened timetable. But what about decisions around allocation of work? How has that shifted for you in this climate in terms of what to send out, what to not? Obviously, you're overloaded internally, but how are you evaluating allocation and work and budget differently as of
Yeah.
COVID?
Budget's an interesting question because I would say whatever we had has been like shrunk. Um, I think that, look, we've always looked at our outside partners, and I will call them partners advisedly, for a couple of things. First of all, it's expertise that we don't necessarily have inside. And the second is a little bit of a safety valve in terms of work. I would say it was the expertise piece of it that we really drew on a lot. You know, you're doing these financings, you're trying to figure out, I'll just move into the, SEC area, the disclosure area, the financing area. This is brave new world. How do you rewrite your risk factors for COVID when things are changing week to week? We're trying to figure out what do we know, and what can we say? And certainly, can we even give guidance? And we, like many companies, we pulled our guidance. It was like, there's nothing meaningful we can say here. And we've been enormously gratified by the folks that we work with a lot. We would just call them up and basically say, help. And they say, what can we do? Or they would reach out to us and say, look, we know this is a horrible time. Can we help? And some of it was the check-ins we were talking about before, just a text that says, I'm really thinking about you, which of course you don't have time to answer for a few days. But there is something so affirming about the people that you work with in a business relationship, but you realize it's much more than a transactional relationship. It's really your friends as much as business professional colleagues. So I would say there's nothing drastically changed about the model that we used in terms of allocation. We definitely leaned on some of our outside counsel, and they totally stepped up to the plate, have been amazing partners. It was their deep knowledge of the company and actually of our in-house teams that I think made that even more successful, because people trying to think if we really formed any new relationships at this time. And I think the answer is probably no, or very minimally. We really fell back on you guys. You have been in the trenches with us before. You know our company, you know our issues, and we need your help right now.
It's interesting to hear, obviously grounded in institutional knowledge, it's a huge piece, and the expertise you talked about, as well as the personal touch of just, how are you? Like, as a person, how are you holding up? We work closely together. I know you. What, can I do anything? I'm curious, besides those two aspects, is there anything else that has been a differentiator for you for either outside counsel or other legal service providers in terms of the type of outreach or support that has really been a distinguisher for you, that you say, this is really what a true partnership looks like?
Yeah. Again, I think it's kind of a confirmation of what we knew before. The folks who are they're rolling up their sleeves together with us. We put a lot of demands on some of our outside providers. There was a lot of stress involved, timing issues. And I would say people they sort of did what we expected them to do, which was to be there for us. And that willingness to find us the right resources, make the right resources available to us was very, very important. Look, they also worked with us on things like, can you look at your billing rates? How about payment schedules? Obviously, for most companies, especially at the beginning of this, liquidity was a huge issue. Conserving cash was a huge issue. And we were not unmindful of the fact that every single legal service provider had the same challenges that we did. It's not like, okay, money is just not flowing into us right now, but it keeps flowing into you. Well, not necessarily if all your clients are in the position we are. But people being able to navigate that with us and understand the extreme position that we were in, at least at the beginning, thank God that has moderated, I think was really important. I think it was really important.
Absolutely. It's interesting in talking with in-house lawyers. I think a lot of what they want to do in order to do their job well is to really align themselves with their business leaders. And in this environment right now, I think there's a particularly interesting opportunity to do that in the hospitality industry, for example, thinking creatively about different ways that traditional hotels can be used. And I just wonder, is that been part of what you and your team have done? Because I'm hearing also, there's so much monotony and a lot of people are really struggling with this sort of monotony of at least the environment that they're working in. And so the idea of being part of an innovative process, using the changes in the environment to invite new ideas is really exciting to people. So I'm just wondering if that's been part of the process for you and your team.
It has. I think for us, it's somewhat organic. I think we're very, very fortunate that the in-house legal team is seen very much as partners with the business. So we're also by nature a very cautious company. We want to stay on the right side of things and do the right thing, cross T's, dot I's. And I think part of it is knowing when the business is looking at, okay, you're trying to do demand recovery, for example. What are some of the tools that we're going to use? What are some of the campaigns that we're going to start on? Knowing that you don't want to be tone deaf and say, oh, come stay with us when nobody can, leave their houses, or actually nobody wants to accept flights from the US without putting us in a quarantine for 2 weeks. But some of it is, let's bring in the lawyers to help us solve those problems, help us think through what we can do to move the business forward. I'd like to think it's always been an important part of how we operate, and even more so, which is, in some ways, it made it very challenging to think about, people on the team who were departing either through a voluntary separation program or then job eliminations, because everybody felt like, wow, we need to support our clients. We need to do the business of the business. How in the world are we going to do that if we don't have the right people? So a lot of the thinking that went into how we reconfigure the department going forward was really based in what's the work. The other thing that I'll bring up too is in terms of outside providers, I think since all of us are stuck looking at our computers all day, we've been trying to take advantage of everything that's out there, webinars and conferences. Some of our law firms are putting on amazing things that, in an hour, you can do a deep dive into something. There was one that I listened to a couple of weeks ago about doing financings, and it was like, okay, we didn't do so badly. We knew what we were doing. So some of it is affirming, and some of it is you might as well learn something when you're going through all this.
Right.
And then I think, again, you bring the ideas back to your clients and say, I heard this on something that I was listening to, and let's think about it like this. I think one of the big challenges in the industry right now is, frankly, money and revenue. With revenues really taking a beating, I think we have such great ideas, and then we think, not necessarily sure we can realize all of them right now until things loosen up a little bit.
As you talk about, your reconfiguration of the department and the changes and the furloughs and things you've had to do, and then coupled with being in the industry that you're in right now, morale is a huge issue, I'm sure. And I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing that people are talking about mental health issues now more than ever. And so I wonder what kinds of things, if anything, now that you're sort of out of the initial crisis, as you described it, and sort of at the next stage, are there things that you can do or have been able to do or you're starting to think about doing to give your team a little bit more sort of peace and quiet when they're not on call, because this is a marathon and not a sprint. We see that. And I'll just give you one example. When I co-ran Bliss Lawyers, we actually developed for our corporate team an email restraint policy. And we forbade non-time sensitive emails with the corporate team on the weekends. And you were not allowed to send those emails. If there was a client issue, obviously you responded right away, but there was no internal communications. And when we were acquired by Axiom earlier this year, we got feedback from our team. This was the single biggest happiness boost that made them happy working for us for those 9 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there are ways, particularly with people struggling delineating lines between work and home, are there things that you've been able to think about doing or want to do to rejuvenate your team and give them really the resilience and opportunity to go at this with you for the long haul?
Probably one of the single most important things that I think confronts all of us as leaders in a time like this. So we've been toying around with sort of these prohibitions that I'm not sure really work for us as a 24/7 business that spans the globe. With that said, however, I encourage everybody to learn how to delay their emails on Outlook. Just because I'm trying to catch up on emails on the weekend doesn't mean I need a response right then, or it's in some ways easier for me to get it off my plate, but nobody needs to see that until Monday morning. So whenever people say to me, wow, you can do that, it's like, yes, and you need to learn how to do that right now. Some of it is giving permission to people not to be always on. And I think it's so hard to do that in an authentic way, because honestly, I don't think people believe us. And part of it is the profession that we're in. We pride ourselves on being, responsive and you're always on. And actually, that's ridiculous, because sometimes you'll be in a meeting and you'll get another phone call. You can't be always on to those two things. You do have to prioritize. And I think that our folks need to see us stopping work in the evening, taking weekends, taking a vacation. I had a situation where one of my guys, we had some email back and forth, and he said, well, I can jump on a call this evening and talk about it. And I was like, you know what, we'll do this tomorrow morning. You should go have dinner with your family right now and go watch TV or read a book or play with your kids. And I think that it is incumbent upon us as leaders to show the way there. If we just pay lip service, if you just say, everybody needs to take care of themselves and shut the computer down for the weekend, everybody's like, yeah, easy to say. And they don't see you doing it. I have to say, I think I'm probably a terrible role model of this, because I'm not sure I take my own advice. But I think it's really important to keep reiterating it to people that actually we mean this. And sometimes you're not going to hear from me right away because I'm going to leave it till tomorrow morning. I also think we have to be willing to intervene with our clients. It's really hard for a more junior attorney to be able to say to somebody, this really isn't that important. I'll get back to you tomorrow. But if I hear that there are people who are just pounding on my guys for, ridiculous timelines and turnaround times, I want to know about it so I can go talk to them and tell them it's not happening. And it is incumbent on you to prioritize. If you don't prioritize, we'll prioritize for you. But you can't ask people, to your point, it is a marathon, and people can do heroic amounts of work, and then they need a little downtime. And by the way, it'll make for better decision making in the long run too. And it'll avoid burnout. And by the way, we're all trying to avoid getting sick. So it is passionately interesting to me how we do it in an authentic way so that we're just not seen as lip service.
I think for law firm lawyers listening, a lot of it's about framing. If I were working with you on something, Rena, and you did not indicate a deadline, I would be afraid to suggest I wasn't ready to jump right on it, let's say that weekend. But I would probably say to you, I want to be really responsive on this. when would be the best time for you to see a draft of this? And you may say next Wednesday. I'm like, oh, great, I'll keep my weekend plan. So I think you can frame it in a smart way so that it's saying, how can I meet and exceed your
Right.
expectations? And then you may be surprised, or you may have that weekend that you're working anyway. I think the issue, though, about, emails and things like that, I do think it is about modeling behavior. So those
Mm-hmm.
timed emails that you can schedule for later, that really means a lot, because if you send an email on Saturday and says, I don't need this till Monday, they're going to, at a minimum, be perseverating it all weekend about it because,
Yep.
they've gotten it. So I think when it's non-time sensitive, then to do that modeling of behavior really helps. We have a question from outside, and then I want to quickly, if you could quickly address this, and then I want to wrap it up with one more thing. How do you see company-wide events like all hands meetings and holiday parties changing as we go forward?
Mm. Well, I think there's kind of a short term and then there is a longer term. I think in the short term, you have a couple of things going on. You have the response to the virus, and you have people's individual comfort levels, and it's just all over the board at this point. And we were just having a discussion yesterday about upcoming board meetings, which we've been doing totally by video conference. But at a certain point, you do have to get back together. You don't want to shame people in having to show up if they feel uncomfortable or their personal health situation is such that it really doesn't make sense. Holiday parties, some of this is also money. It's just what you're going to spend your money on. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about a membership I had in something, and I said to them, literally, it's either somebody's job or I keep doing this. And I voted for the person's job, and I'm just going to have to take a pause on the membership. So I think at some point we will get back to holiday parties. Probably not this year, to be honest. I think that there's just too much concern about being able to do it. I'm happy to say our hotels are trying their hardest to be able to accommodate events and weddings and parties. But a lot of it is a comfort level for the people in attendance. And some of it is what do you want to spend your money on when, the economic situation could be better.
When they do get rescheduled, they'll all be at the Marriott, though. We'll make sure of that.
We hope so.
Very quickly, let's leave with one parting message from you, and that is really the thing that you've learned the most from this experience that you want to take with you, both as a leader as well as a person going forward.
So I think some of it is transparency and the importance of transparency. And the other is the willingness to be vulnerable and engage in real conversations with people. And again, I see that in a couple of instances. One is the, how, not the how are you doing as it's just a throwaway line. It's really, are you holding up okay? And the other, again, and I'll go back to the issue of Black Lives Matter, engage in conversations with people. What is really on their minds? What are people wrestling with? These are really hard conversations to have. And I'm really grateful that, in particular, several people on my team have been willing to have those tough conversations with me and have opened doors into what's really going on in people's psyches. And from the very immediate in terms of how they're showing up to work to despair in many cases about what's going on in this country. But I think that without the willingness to engage in those conversations, first of all, you lose such an amazing part of getting to know your teams. But I also think that puts you on the road to start repairing some of the tears that we see in the fabric of our communities.
Rena, that's beautiful. And what I know about you as a person is so much of it for you to be able to have those conversations with members of your team is that you as a leader have invited those conversations and many have not. And the speaking I'm doing on leadership these days, I really think it's this magic mix of conviction and humility. And you have both of those qualities. And I think that's why you continue to be such an enormous success and role model. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. My pleasure.
Wonderful to see you. And I want to thank Axiom for hosting today's discussion and all of our participants. And I really look forward to the potato chips in person next time.
Good.
Thanks again.
Stay healthy and come visit us.
I would love to. Thanks again.
Thank you.